Started. It's actually a real continuation from yesterday, so thankfully we were all here yesterday. But I will review. We were up to the first word on Daf Lamed Daled, but let me give the reminder from the Mishnah. Remember, this Mishnah dealt with a very curious and obviously contrived case. We're going to see. The Gemara later today tries to make it sound like it actually happened and responds incredulously. Such a thing really is unlikely to have ever happened, where two men married two women. That part seems pretty straightforward. The women were swapped. It sounds ultimately like it was a mistake, right? They misidentified who they were. But remember, the big challenge, of course, is that there was kiddushin beforehand, so they were legally married, and then ended up sleeping with someone who's not their husband or not their wife. And then the Mishnah added, which is an issue of eshet ish, if they are also brothers, the two brothers, then if sleeping with the other woman is sleeping with the brother's wife, eshet ach, which is a second isser. Third one would be if the two wives were sisters, the two women were sisters, so then it's achot isha. And if they were a nida, then it would be four prohibitions. And we thought this was a really exciting case because it illustrated all of the points that we talked about yesterday of isur chalal isur, right? Remember, there's three sort of levels. Again, the basic assumption here is that ein isur chalal isur, that if something is prohibited to eat for one reason and you add a second reason to it, it doesn't make it more asur. That's the assumption. The only exception we're assuming is if you added something with this new isur, like something new happened. So we had three levels. The first, and we thought was the lightest level, was the isur kolel, right? Where this object does not become more asur, but the person or the thing becomes asur to more people, right? So achot isha is the example, right? A person is not allowed to sleep with a woman until she's married. But then by marrying her sister, it becomes asur on all of her sisters. Let's say she's 5 sisters. So because the isur is chal on the other 3 sisters, other 4 sisters, it also applied to the 5th sister who was previously prohibited. Again, it didn't add anything for that person. That's called isur kolel. Then there was an isur mosif where it actually added something. And the example was yesterday, you couldn't eat something. We'll see the case today as well. And then you became asur in hana'ah as well. Right? So previously you couldn't eat it. You still can't eat it. But it became asur b'hana'ah, in which case it added isurim to it. So maybe it added another isur achila. Right? It was previously prohibited to eat, but you could get benefit. Now let's say it's truma, which is the case we're going to have. It became asur b'hana'ah, and therefore it added something to the object itself. In terms of the wives or the women, the case was neshadah, right? A woman was prohibited, we'll get to the case, but she was prohibited and she became neshadah. And the final case was an isur that happens at the same time, right? Where there's 2 isurim that actually occur identically. For example, the case where someone became mature on Shabbat, let's say, or the case where you killed a bird and it became a karban at the same time that it became an avela. And so those isurim happen together, and so we assume that's the least radical case to say that isur chalal isur, because it's actually not chalal isur, it happens simultaneously. So those are all the cases. Says the Gemara today, top line of Lamed Daled Amud Aleph. Man hai Tana, who is the actual identified Tana, the Itlai, who holds of all of these principles applying at once? Isur kolel, isur that adds, isur mosif, isur batachat. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, Rabbi Meir. In fact, we're going to find a Tana Rabbi Meir. Remember, we previously had a machloket of other Tanaim, Shimon, Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Meir holds all 3. It's not. As we learned in a Mishnah, this is in Kutut. Yesh ochel achila achat. A person can eat one act of eating, one hamburger. Okay? V'chayav aleh arba chataot v'asham echad. For that one act, that one meal, you're chayav 4 karbanot chatat. Of course, if it's shogeg, you don't realize something's wrong. You do this thing, and 1 asham. Now, what is the case? Tameh. Person, say a man, but it could be a woman too, is tameh. She'achal chelev. He eats chelev. Now, chelev is a prohibited part of an animal that you're never allowed to eat, right? From the animal's creation, from the birth of the animal, you're not allowed to eat. And it's notar. And it was a carbon. Remember, notar is where it was left over, right? From not where it's left over, but where you had a machshava, right? Well, This notar, let's say, is leftover. Okay, so there's difference in notars, but not a machshava here. It's actually leftover. So you bought a karban and it was left over, so it's prohibited to be eaten, and it's mina muktashin. Of course, it's from a karban, and those are 3 isurim, right? So chelev, notar, muktashin. Sorry, it's 4 isurim. Chelev, notar, tamei. Muktashin is actually the isur of asham because it's nevila, and it's Yom HaKippurim. You're eating it on Yom Kippur when you're not allowed to eat. So you sat down on Yom Kippur, I don't know exactly what you were showing off to, and had this big meal against B'shogeg, so you didn't realize a lot of things. And you had this meal on Yom Kippur, you're chayav 4 times, and 4 chataot, and an asham. Rabbi Meir says, and this is the opinion that we're going to use, if it was Shabbat and Yom Kippur, the hotzio b'piv chayav, you're another one, right? So if it's Shabbat, and you're walking while you're eating, so while you walk, you carry it outside. Remember, usually, if you're walking and you carry something, there's no hanacha, right? As long as you don't stop, you're not over Isur Shabbat. But with food, once you swallow it, that's considered to be settled. So even if you don't stop walking, the fact that the food is no longer in your mouth and it's in your stomach means that the food is put down, quote unquote. That's halacha. If a person walks out on Shabbat eating, then that's considered a hanacha, right? So says Rabbi Meir, well, if you're walking in Shabbat, you're over another one. And they said to Rabbi Meir, that could be true, but you also could be, ripping a piece of paper at the same time. Like, that's nothing to do with, we're talking about you're eating, right? Walking and eating are not the same thing, right? So they said to Rabbi Meir, Eino min Hashem. It's not that you're wrong, it's just that that's not the same family, right? It's not the same isur. So you're just adding extraneous things, okay? Now that's a machloket, we discussed this in elsewhere. But the point here is, according to Rabbi Meir, right? Rabbi Meir is implying that you're over all of these things. Rabbi Meir is adding an extra isur, right, of carrying it on Shabbat. Now remember, carrying Shabbat. So the isur of Shabbat and the isur of Yom Kippur happened at the same time, right? So therefore, basically, this piece of chelev was born asur. It's chelev, right? That's the first prohibition. You make it hektish, you're adding something on, right? By making hektish, you add on isurei hana'ah, you add on certain things. That's isur mosif, right? Then it becomes notar. And when it becomes notar, it's already prohibited to you, right? But it's kolel because it's also prohibited to other people at this point, right? It's prohibited to kohanim. It's prohibited to everybody. So that's mosif and kolel. And then if you add Shabbat and Yom Kippur, it means that at the same time that Shabbat started, Yom Kippur started, and the prohibition of carrying on Shabbat and eating on Yom Kippur happened at the same time. So clearly, according to Rabbi Meir, you can have all 3 categories in one case. And that's the support for our mission.
There's a machloket here, though, right? Because didn't Rabbi Shimon say that if something is asur, it cannot be more asur, right?
Rabbi Shimon disagrees with this. No, not in this mission. Is not necessarily machloket. Yes, Rabbi Shimon holds any isur chalal isur unless it's bevat achat. That was the one exception.
Right.
Happened at the same time. He said yesterday. Now, remember, it was machloket even according to Rabbi Shimon, but we paskin from that Mishnah that Bar Kapar was wrong, and that if it was bevat achat, Rabbi Shimon would admit that it's okay. That's isur chalal isur, or again, it's not chalal isur. Isur happens together. Ask the Gemara, fascinating question. But before we get into the details of isur chalal isur, says the Gemara, what about the fact that there's generally a principle? If you recall, we had this in Shabbat, that if you are to'eh b'dvar mitzvah, if you make a mistake while you're doing an act that's a mitzvah, it's not considered the same shogeg, because we expect that's normal. Remember the case in Shabbat that we talked about this a lot was where a person had to do a brit milah on Shabbat, right? Which if the kid's 8 days old, you're allowed to do on Shabbat. If the kid is 7 days old, then it's just cutting on Shabbat, right? There's nothing, it's an isur d'oraita, it's an isur of avodah. So the case in the Gemara in Shabbat, the Mishnah, was that you switched up the babies, right? The person was going to do a brit milah, they brought the wrong kid, they did a brit milah on Shabbat. So unfortunately, it sounds like a lawsuit somewhere. But anyways, it's ta'ah bidvar mitzvah. And we had a machloket there as to whether you're chayiv a karban chatat for that. So says the Gemara, well, who is Rabbi Meir going according to? Rabbi Meir, aliba deman. Aliba de Yeshua. If he's going according to Rabbi Yeshua, was one of the opinions. Amar ta'ah bidvar mitzvah patur. Rabbi Yeshua says, in that case of a baby, where the babies were switched, that if you were to'eh, and you did a malach on Shabbat, you did a cut, right, which you're not allowed to do a chabura, but you did it because you thought you were doing a mitzvah. Now, you weren't doing a mitzvah because the baby was 7 days old, right? There's no mitzvah. Same way here, you think you're eating kachin here, but in fact, you're wrong for many, many reasons. A, it's tameh. B, it's notar. It's chelev, and it's Yom Kippur. right? But you think the act you're doing is a mitzvah, eating the kachim, right? So you shouldn't be chayiv a chatat for that. Ella must be a libad Rebbe Eliezer. Okay, it must be he's going, which we don't like because Rebbe Eliezer might not be the way he paskin, but it must be he's going according to Rebbe Eliezer. Or the Gemara is quoting this for the next line. Maybe he is going according to Rabbi Yeshua, which would of course make sense because Rabbi Yeshua is the Tana who says yesterday Isur Chalal Isur, right? So it would be good for Rabbi Meir to rely on Rabbi Yeshua. But Ki Kama Rabbi Yeshua Ta'abitvar Mitzvah Patur. When Rabbi Yeshua says that if you're in the act of doing a mitzvah and you make a mistake in Chalal Shabbat, that you're patur from a chatat, that is Hanini Rabbi Tinokot. That's only true in that specific instance when you're talking about babies, right? Where there's a lot of pressure. Zmano bahul. There's a lot of pressure to do this. Now, Zmano bahul, Rashi says, is because you have to do the Brit Milah today, right? There's no, so Zmano bahul is not the minute, but you've got to do it today. And anyone who's been, I've never had a Brit Milah, or done, well, I haven't. But anyways, but it's very pressure, right? You have to do it this time, especially on Shabbat, right? You've got to do it on the 8th day. This is Bismano. And so there's a lot of pressure to do it. It happens that you make mistakes, that you get the wrong kid, that you're rushing to do it. You don't check very carefully in the simanim, which of course all 8-day-old babies are the same. And so you make a mistake. That's what Rabbi Yeshua says, that if you're doing a mitzvah and you make a mistake that's somewhat legitimate, you don't bring a korban. Aval hai, but this person, kivan de'ein zmano bahol lo. But in this case, look, it's nice of you to do this mitzvah, but there's no requirement that you have to do it today. I mean, there's no one's pressuring you. And so because of that, even though you think you're doing a mitzvah, it's not enough to get you off a korban because your zman is not as bahol. As well, okay, but that's true by a korban. But what about truma? In truma, now, eating truma, in general, you would think ein zmano bahol, right? If you're a kohen and someone gives you truma, there's no time limit. It might expire soon, I guess. But, if it's grain, you eat it whenever you want to eat it. So in theory, according to your svara, if a person makes a mistake with truma, they should bring a korban. You don't call that ta'abitvar mitzvah. But we learned in the Mishnah, the kapatar, we learned that he's pater. It's not. This is another Mishnah which says truma. Haya ochel betruma. Let's say a person is eating truma. He's sitting down. He's having a big loaf of bread that's made from grain that's truma, and he finds out while he's sitting there, ben gusha ben chalitza. Right, he's sitting with his father. His father says, "I have something I wanted to tell you many years ago. Your mother was gusha, which means that the child becomes a halal basically. He's not ra'oi l'kuhuna because he came from an illicit relationship, right? So he finds out in the middle of his meal that he's a ben gusha or ben chalitza, which means he can't eat truma anymore. So now this person just ate truma. They weren't a kohen. It was a mistake, obviously. But according to your rationale, even though it was ta'abitvar mitzvah, because he thought he was doing a mitzvah of eating truma, the fact is that there was no one pressuring him to eat truma, so it wasn't bahul, so he should be chayav. But what does the Mishnah say? Rabbi Eliezer mechayav kerem mechomesh. Rabbi Eliezer says, yeah, you're chayav. Remember, if you eat things from a kohen, you have to pay back a fifth on top of what you ate. And Rabbi Yeshua poter. Rabbi Yeshua says you're poter. And why are you poter? Because you're doing a dvar mitzvah. But according to your rationale, dvar mitzvah is only an excuse if it's a very high pressure situation. Like
even if it's bishogeg?
So remember, b'shogeg it's me'ila. Yeah, so you only pay a chomesh.
Well, but he doesn't know. I mean, nobody told him that he was not a kohen.
Yeah, but that's the same thing about me'ila, right? If you take something from hagdish, you didn't know. That's the whole case of me'ila. You have to not just pay back what you took, because you have to pay, but you have to add a chomesh, b'shogeg, right? But according to Rabbi Yeshua, you don't pay anything, right? You're patur. Not you don't pay necessarily, but that you're not going to have an extra, and that's because it's a dvar mitzvah. You thought you were doing a mitzvah of eating truma, but you're telling me now that's limited to this case of the babies, or there's a lot of pressure. That's the only time where dvar mitzvah is an excuse. Says the Gemara, well, of course you forgot the Gemara in Pesachim, because Pesach is coming up. In fact, it was a time where it was a lot of pressure. It was Erev Pesach, you had 3 donuts left made of truma, and it's time to stop eating at 10:30, and you're rushing to wolf it down. So you didn't have time to check, am I a Kohen, am I not a Kohen? So and as you can tell already, the Gemara is getting nervous about Pesach.
No, but the presumption, he didn't know he wasn't a Kohen. I mean, the presumption is, if you are a Kohen, the presumption is, I'm a Kohen tomorrow and the next day and the next day.
Completely didn't know. It's essentially an onus. It's a different, this is a question that we got into a little bit before, which is, there's levels of shogeg, right? I mean, there's times where we say, you didn't know, And there's times where you should have known, right? Why didn't you check? Like, so we hold you responsible on different levels based on what kind of knowledge you could have conceivably had. Of course, it's very difficult to be that nuanced because every situation, right, is somewhat different. So there are rules, but and one of the rules that Rabbi Yeshua has quoted and we're using here is that if the act you're engaged in is a Torah mitzvah, then we generally don't apply the same requirements of shogeg. When you don't bring it from a chatat, you don't pay a fifth. But we're saying that Rabbi Yeshua only said a Dvar mitzvah if it's a type of Dvar mitzvah where there's a lot of pressure, where you have to do it right then, like a brit milah or eating chametz on Erev Pesach, right? Okay. Anyways, but it's a little bit of a side topic for us, right? It's not really our issue. So that's one isur. Says the Gemara, the ibait ema, or it could be that this whole case is not illustrating anything. I mean, the whole case of our Mishnah is not illustrating isur mosif, isur kolel. It's every isur in our Mishnah happened bevat achat. Ibait ema isur bat achat and it's alibad Rabbi Shimon. That our whole Mishnah is not telling you that isurim of eshet ach and achot isha add on to each other. It's where it happened at the exact same time, and it's like Rabbi Shimon, which is the question that Hanan, you asked me on the stairs yesterday. Can you say all the marriages happened exactly at one time? Remember, right? They all got married at once. So if they all got married at once, then the eshet ish, the achot isha, the eshet ach, all happened simultaneously. I told you yesterday it was difficult to do that, but we're going to find the case today. Okay? What is, maybe it wasn't you, but I think we had this discussion yesterday. Anyways, it's bevat achat, alibad Rabbi Shimon. It says the Gemara, 1 second. How in the world can you get married at once, right? Remember, we had a problem before that if two people walk over to two women and say, "How will you marry me?" and they say yes, we never assume it's simultaneous, right? There's always an instant. We don't know which one. It would be a safek, right? But you would never assume. Remember, we talked before about whether things happened at the exact same time. There was a machloket about it, right? But we generally don't assume that things happen at the exact same time. We don't necessarily know which one happened first, but you can assume that, right? That things happen exactly at the same time. Remember, Afshalat Samsein is the words we used, right, to make exactly at the same time. Says Gemara, but however, there's another case. And what's the case? Right? The case is where the two brothers gave agency to another person to be their messenger. So these two brothers decide they want to marry two sisters who live in somewhere else, right? So they both go to the same person and say, will you be my shliach to give kiddushin to woman X and woman Y, right? And the sisters do the same thing. Shavu inu shliach. They also appoint a shliach to go. And of course, they're both traveling on the New Jersey Turnpike and they bump into each other. Upaga shliach b'shliach, right? So the shliachs bumped into each other and they're like, oh, I'm on my way to so-and-so. I'm on my way to so-and-so. Turns out they're heading for each other, basically. And so they say, okay, let's do it. So it all happens simultaneously because, again, basically you're taking it away from the men who are individuals into a shliach who has the common responsibility. So then, again, in that case, they got married, they became eshet ach and achot isha all at the exact same time. And there, Rabbi Shimon would agree that every isur is chal. The problem is, of course, what was the fourth isur in our Mishnah? Now it gets very exciting. Now you know why our Mishnah added the fourth one, right? Because if Mishnah had added the fourth one, we would have been able to go home now, close to Gemara. But the fact that we added the fourth one is a little complicated. The nidah. How can nidah happen at the exact same time for both women at the exact same moment that they got married? Right? How could that be? Says the Gemara, nidot hechim mishkachet la, amar v'amram, amar Rav. It's talking about a case where it all happened simultaneously when they became 13 years old, or in the 13th year, just 12 years old in a day, right? So basically, these were women who were shofat. They were already bleeding when they were still minors, bintoch yud gimel, this is Rashi's girsa, before they got into the 13th year, meaning before they turned 12 full years, and into la'achar shlosh esrei, right? The chiyuve inu mitoch shnei masar la'achar shnei masar. Sorry, they mitoch yud gimel la'achar shlosha asar. The chiyuve inu mitoch shnei masar la'achar shnei masar. The chiyuve inu. That basically the men became 13, women became 12 at exactly the same moment. They were all born, let's say, on the same day, right, 1 year apart. Men were 1 year older than the women. The boys were 1 year older than the girls. And so the women were already were bleeding. And essentially, this is a little complicated. You have to understand, according to Rashi, that they set up the shliach when they were still 12. Usually a minor can't do that. But since you have an idea that you're going to become 13, it basically is conditioned until 13. And so basically it was a conditional marriage until they became adults. The moment everyone became adults, which was at the same day, right, at the same time, the boys are married because they are now adults. The women are married, but they're also nidot, right? Because they're both adults who are already bleeding, who are also able to accept each. And so basically this very, very far-fetched situation where you set up these twins who are the same age with twin sisters who are the same age, but also exactly 1 year younger, and they all set up this condition, and they finally all Isurim happen at one time. And that is the far-fetched setup for our mission. Pretty far-fetched. Now, continues the Gemara. We're going to get to a little bit of a side topic, which is interesting, but ultimately, I don't think it's that relevant. I'm not a doctor, but I'm not a doctor in this kind of thing. But the Gemara makes an assumption today, which the Gemara sticks with very, very consistently, but I don't think people think it's still true, that a woman cannot become pregnant from her first act of intercourse. So that a virgin who has intercourse will not become pregnant from that act of intercourse. Why exactly? They obviously believed it very firmly, but maybe because...
Didn't we have a case yesterday where they slept with the wrong women and you have to wait 3 months?
That's why we're talking about that. That's exactly what we're going to get to.
Oh,
correct.
Okay.
But the point is, the assumption was that physically it either doesn't happen or it's unlikely to happen. There's different explanations. One is that there's a lot of blood and so the bleeding sort of prevents pregnancy, maybe, or because it's painful for the woman the first time. They don't consummate, they don't finish, doesn't complete the act. Anyways, there's why exactly is not so clear. And the Gemara says, as a principle, a woman does not become pregnant with Bia Rishona, the first ever act of intercourse. Says the Gemara, how does that make any sense with our Mishnah? Our Mishnah said that they separate them for 3 months, so that if the woman becomes pregnant, you know whether it's from the first person she slept with or her second person or the husband. As the Gemara, 6 lines from the bottom, a woman who presumably, in this case, is getting married and is a virgin, right? She's a virgin. So this is her first time having intercourse, so she can't become pregnant from that. So why do you have to separate them for 3 months? Well, it's talking about a case where they had intercourse twice, right? Meaning on that night. So they slept with them. That was the first act. She was a virgin. She can't become pregnant. But then, at some point later in the evening, they did it again. And so therefore, they can become pregnant. And I guess you assume that's what happens. That, they didn't, remember, she doesn't know her identity. It's not done on purpose here. He assumes they're being married, and that's what you have to assume. He says, well, if that's the case, then why don't you bring a korban chatat for each act? Right? Instead, there's 16 chataot for the 4 people who have 4 averot, but if you do it twice, then it should double that. Well, there's 16 chataot, it should be 32, so it's even tartan having. Furthermore, according to your answer, Tamech, remember, you're saying it's Rabbi Eliezer is the ton of our Mishnah. But if that's the case, right, Eliezer says that if a person has illicit intercourse, they're chayav for every act, meaning every thrust, or every koach, whatever koach means, every energy that they put into it. It's not just a consummation. It's not the beginning. It's not the end. So it could be much more than that, right? Tuva it could be many, many more chataot. Ella must be the koach rishon kachashin. We're only talking about the initial act, like the initial penetration. Hachanami bi'ah rishona kachashin. It's true. What Rabbi Chia was saying was there's a minimum basically of 16, right, from the bi'ah. It's true that you have to then interrogate the circumstance to say how many times did you sleep together, how many acts were involved, and you bring a korban for each one. It seems like it would get incredibly expensive, but that's the reality. Amar le Rava le Rav Nachman. Turn the page. Tamar, the bi'ah rishona. What do you mean a woman can't become pregnant with her first bi'ah? Tamar, right? Remember, Tamar had one chance, right, to sleep with Yehuda. Yehuda was never going to sleep with her again, and she became pregnant. Right? That was the whole story in the pasuk. But she slept with Yehuda, and she became pregnant, and then of course that led to a little scandal before it was revealed that it was Yehuda's child. But Tamar, she presumably, now the Gemara is going to ask in a little bit why the heck you would assume this, right? Tamar was married to 2 men before she slept with Yehuda, if you recall, Aaron and Amnon, right? 2 sons of Yehuda. So why you would assume Tamar is still a virgin, we're going to ask in a second, but we're assuming that those sons of Yehuda never consummated their marriage with Tamar, right? And now, of course, we'll see why, because it does say about Onan, he didn't want to have children. We don't say that about Aaron, but we'll ask in a second. And she had one intercourse with Yehuda, and she became pregnant. So you see from Tamar that it's possible that you can become pregnant with your bi'ah rishona. Amar le, so he said back to him 1 second. Tamar did become pregnant with bi'ah rishona, but she was be'etzba ma'acha. She used her finger to rub away, to destroy her betulim. So she physically put her finger inside and ripped off her betulim or whatever. This is ma'acha means literally push them, but she did it. And Rashi explains that basically, or well, elsewhere Rashi says, but it's clear that she did it because she really obviously wanted to become pregnant with Yehuda's child, and she knew that she basically had one chance. So she did this thing, which is presumably quite painful and difficult and unpleasant for sure, in order to increase her chances, so to speak, of becoming pregnant, right? And of course, in her case, if you recall, right, there was a huge stigma back then about Pulim and about that being virginal and having blood. Of course, in her case, she was acting like a zonah, so it didn't quite matter, right? It wasn't like Yehuda mind. So she did that act, and that's how she became pregnant. And in fact, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Kol Mo'achot Shel Beit Rebbe, there's other girsaot here, but this is one girsa, is that all of the women in the house of Rebbe, meaning the wives of the warriors or the students in the house of Rebbe, they used to do this to themselves, right? And they would basically remove their betulim, and they were called Tamar Shman. They were all named Tamar. The handmaids down here, unfortunately, but they're all called Tamar. Why? And they used to do it. Lama Nikwan Shma Tamar. They were all called Tamar. Shem Tamar Shmacha Be'etzva. Why did they do this? So there's a bunch of different explanations. But one explanation is that they very rarely slept with their husbands, because their husbands were traveling, were warriors, were students, Talmidei Chachamim, and they went to yeshiva. They came home once a year or whatever. And so because these women were so eager to become pregnant, they basically did everything they could at the initial intercourse, at the night of the marriage, to increase their chances by doing this unpleasant act of removing their own betulim. And they were therefore honored, essentially, by being called Tamar. They were doing the act that Tamar did to show their love or their desire to become pregnant from their husbands.
Right. It makes sense with Tamar. Otherwise, Yehuda wouldn't have believed that she was a prostitute, right?
Yeah. Anyways, it's a fascinating Gemara because it goes sort of against a lot of things that you would think, but many Gemara do that. You just have to pay attention. But there's a lot to discuss. But presumably, this is just, it's not presumably, it's clear that they wanted to increase their chances of becoming pregnant. Why? Usually would relate to the fact, and this is how most Mefarshim say, that they were with their husbands very infrequently.
So they did this after they got married or something?
Sorry?
They did this after they got married?
They did it on the night of the marriage, right before they got married. Right, so there's the other questions. How do you then prove that you're not, that you're a virgin? But that's all, right? So you might have to say you're doing it or inform someone, whatever,
Right, yeah,
pleasant. But anyways, that's what they used to do. Now, says the Gemara, I don't get it. Fourth line from the top. Havi Erva Onan. What do you mean? She was married. Tamar was previously married to two men. So what do you mean she was a virgin and she had to do this in order to have a child with Yehuda? She was married to Aaron Onan. Says the Gemara, well, we have an understanding that she never slept vaginally with Erev Onan. Erev Onan shimshu shelo kedarkam. They only had intercourse anally. All shelo kedarkam. Because, we'll see why in a second, but presumably because they didn't want to have children, right? So they slept with her, but they only slept with her shelo kedarkam, which is, of course, the terminology used for anal intercourse, but never slept with her in a way that would break her, make her not a virgin. Says the Gemara, one second. Is that really true? Let me ask you a question from a following Braita. It says in the Braita, again, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but we'll see why we're quoting it. That, remember, we had a discussion, we had this earlier in our Masechet, we're going to have it many more times, that if a woman becomes pregnant while she's nursing, that's considered to be very dangerous, right? Because the milk will stop, right? This is a case we talked about a couple of weeks ago about when you can use contraception, right? So if a woman becomes pregnant, then her milk will stop and her baby is gonna die, basically. They thought there was a concern of that, or not her baby, her toddler. And so, therefore, a woman should be very careful not to become pregnant for 24 months after she has a baby. Now, it doesn't say that she's prohibited to have intercourse for 24 months. So what should she do? So says the Braita, Meitvei, 5 lines from the top. Kol esrim va'arba chodesh, for 24 months after a woman gives birth, so meaning when she's nursing, dashni b'fnim v'zoremi b'chutz. When she has intercourse with her husband, he should go and penetrate inside, but ejaculate outside. So, right, whatever, there's a word for it, whatever, that, practice, whatever, okay, I don't remember the words. But either way, we get the idea. So not be zorez, or spread the seed, shoot the seed, but outside. So he should not, so that she doesn't become pregnant, right? Divrei Rebbe Eliezer. That's Rebbe Eliezer's opinion. There's another opinion of the Chachamim, if you recall, that said, don't worry, just do it. Shomer P'tayim Hashem, God will observe, God will protect the fools, right? But this is Rebbe Eliezer's opinion. Amar Leis, the Chachamim said, you can't do that. Halalu eno ela k'maaseh erva onan. That's like acting like era and onan, which implies, again, this is not our debate here, why they do this, but that era onan, it's not that they had intercourse shelo kedarka, it's that they had vaginal intercourse, but that they didn't ejaculate into her, right? They had dashni b'fim and moremi b'chutz, which means that she's not a virgin anymore, right? It goes against what you just said. That's why we're bringing this. That's why, no, we mean kimase ervonan v'lo kimase ervonan. It's like ervonan in the fact that they're being very careful not to allow for conception, right? Meaning, kimase ervonan dichtiv hayim ba'al eshet achiv v'shichet artz says very clearly in the Torah that when Onan slept with his brother's wife, with Tamar, he would waste his seed on the ground, meaning he didn't want to become pregnant. But it's not the exact same action. There, the way they accomplished having intercourse without the possibility of pregnancy was by doing it shelo kedarka, and hachatz kedarka. Okay. So that's our answer. Now ask the Gemara, how in the world do we know that error was a problem too? Remember, Tamar married Er, and he died without children. Then she married Onain, right? And it says about Onain, he didn't want to sleep with her because he didn't want to have children that would be his brothers, right? So we know that Onain was doing that. But how do we know about Er? He was the first brother. We don't know anything about their marriage, right? Maybe everything was fine, right? How do we know that? So Bishlama Onain, it says that he didn't want to have children with her. No, Bishlama Onain, Dichdiv Bei B'shichet Arza. It says he wasted it on the ground. So Ella Er Minalan. How do you know that Er, the husband, the first husband of Tamar, was taking actions not to become pregnant, not to make her pregnant? Amar Nachman Yitzchak, because it says Yamat Gam Oto. When it says that Onain died, it says he also died, implying that the cause of his death was the same thing as the cause of the first brother's death. So although we didn't say anything about Er, Onain was the same. Gam tells you he's also the same thing. Afu B'oto Mita. Bishlama Onain. Now I don't understand why though. This is where Onain says he doesn't want to have children for the obvious reason, or not the obvious reason, but the stated reason of Mishum Lo Hazera, because the children won't be his, right? He wanted to have his own kids. He wanted to be stuck with a woman whose kids would be someone else's kids, brother's kids. They would always go to someone else. Ella Er, my time of So why in the world did Er not want to have children with Tamar? What was his rationale? Says the Gemara, Kadesh lo titaber yachish yafya. It's because Er was focused on her beauty, her external beauty. And she was so beautiful that he was worried, or he was concerned that if she became pregnant, she would lose some of her beauty. And so he prioritized her beauty over conception, which is very believable. And so therefore tried not to make her pregnant by not sleeping with her regularly. And so at the conclusion of this, we decide that Tamar was a virgin. Now, there are many achronim, but not many. There are some achronim who ask, right, this seems so far-fetched. Like, why are you making these assumptions that she was not a virgin, that she was a virgin, she slept with Yehuda, she had to get rid of her own Betulim because, right, why don't you just assume that she slept with them? But obviously there's a tradition that goes along. There's more than just what's written in the Psukim, or more what's read in the Psukim. But either way, that's our assumption, is that Tamar was a virgin despite being married twice, because her husbands did not want her to become pregnant. And so they took all kinds of actions not to sleep with her in a regular, normal way. So either shelo kedarka, well, not only, so shelo kedarka. Anyways, back to our Gemara. Okay. Amar, where are we?
Tanu Rabbanan.
Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, now we'll see why we're bringing this as well. This is, of course, we're bringing it partly because it's from this week's Parsha. That's obviously not why the Gemara is bringing it. Tanu Rabbanan, it says the word Ota. If you recall, in this week's Parsha, Rashi quotes the pasuk. It says, Isha asher yishkav ish ota shichvat zera. Then she has to go to the mikveh, rachatzu b'mayim, right? A woman who sleeps with a man and shichvat zera, sleeping of seed, right? Which is a bizarre formulation. What does that mean? So we're going to darshan ota. She sleeps ota. What does that mean? He sleeps with her, right? She sleeps. And then she has to go to the mikveh, right? Remember, this was in this week's parsha that you have to go to the mikveh after intercourse, in this case. What was that referring to? Prat kala. That's saying ota, meaning she, only a regular woman, not a kala, meaning not a woman who's never had intercourse before, is a virgin. woman who's a virgin who sleeps with a man does not have to go to the mikvah for eating truma, for this kachim, right? Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim omrim prat l'shelo kedarka. Excludes a woman who has intercourse that's not vaginal. That's anal intercourse. Because it says shechvat zera, a way where you normally would pass seed, essentially, and make pregnant, impregnate. Prat shelo kedarka. So this is a bright. Now, Amra le Hon, breder of Nachman, Rav Nachman. Hon, the son of Rav Nachman, said to his father Rav Nachman, I don't understand this bright at all. Why in the world would you say that a woman who's a kala, being a virgin, her first time having intercourse, doesn't fall under the purview of this pasuk? Why would we tell her not to go to the mikveh, right? Amr lehon, breder of Nachman, Rav Nachman. Is it because Lema Kasav Rabbi Yehuda? Is it because the Torah is worried that she's a bride and she paid a lot of money for her makeup? When she goes to the mikveh, she's going to ruin her makeup, right? Presumably he was joking, but that's what he says. But because Lema Kasav Rabbi Yehuda, Torah chasal tachshitei kala, right? Is it because the Torah is worried about the fancy tachshitim, the makeup of a kala, and so that if you make every kala go to the mikvah that night or the next morning, then she put on makeup that was hopefully going to last her for a long time. So you're wasting her money. Again, we assume he's saying this tongue in cheek. Meaning, why is a kala any different?
This is only for a kala?
So what the Braita says is that if the first time, the pasuk says that a woman who has intercourse with a man has to go to the mikvah.
Every time?
It's probably for eating kachim, but not for, but yeah. For kachim, she has to, yes. Every time. Man does also for shechvat zera, the pasuk says, just to be clear.
Okay, all right.
Anyways, this is not for nida. This has nothing to do with nida, and in fact, nothing to do with pregnancy, right? Just it's in this week's parsha.
Yeah, I know. I didn't.
There were a lot of things in this week's parsha that people don't miss over. That's the reality. But yes, so the Rashi goes through it over there a little bit. But anyways, it's not our sugya. But the point is that the Braita says that it excludes if you have intercourse the first time. So the question that Hon was asking his father, Nachman, was why? Why would the first time be different than every other time? So he made a joke, I think. That is it because you pay a lot of money for makeup for a wedding, and so if you go to the makeup, ruin your hair, right? So his father said to him, no, of course that's not the reason. And a woman cannot become pregnant with that piyah. And so since she can't become pregnant, again, not that there's any, if you don't go to the mikvah because you become pregnant, but because the act of intercourse was not a potential impregnating act, because as we're going now, a woman, again, this is the Gemara's assumption, which it does not give up, ever. Most can say, today, don't rely on this, right? But the Gemara's assumption is that a woman cannot become pregnant from her first act of intercourse, ever. And so therefore, assuming a kala is a virgin, and this is her first act, it's not a bi'ah that would lead to pregnancy. And therefore, the whole issue of mikvah does not apply in that specific case, right? That's the Tanakh. So that's what Rav Nachman said. What are they arguing about in this pasuk? Rabbanan Savri, it says if he sleeps with her, shichvat zera. And what does the word shichvat zera mean? It means he ejacts seed, he ejaculates. Prat leha'ara, right? That excludes a person who penetrates a woman but does not ejaculate, just penetrates. So there she doesn't go to the woman. And it says ota, her, meaning prat shelo kedarka. That excludes anal intercourse, which of course again doesn't lead to any children, or potential for children. And Rabbi Yehuda savar that shelo kedarka and ha'ara, both of those cases are cases where there's no shichvat zera being ejaculated. Right? And so the pasuk of shichvat zera can exclude both of those stuff, both shelo kedarka and ha'ara, where you just penetrate. Ota is to give you a third case, and that's probably kala. That's brought to a woman who cannot become pregnant, even though you're having regular vaginal intercourse with ejaculation. So that's
he would have to go to the mikvah.
Well, he none of
for shelo kedarka. But she wouldn't.
No. So this pasuk is requiring him and her to go to the mikvah if they have regular vaginal intercourse, and it potentially could lead to conception. So if it was done was not consummated, so it was only what's called ha'ara, or it was done shelo kedarka, then you don't have to. And what he's adding, what the Gemara is adding is, what Yehuda's adding, is that if it's the first time she ever had intercourse,
it's not the ejaculation, it's the potential for
potential
for pregnancy.
Conception. Okay. Now, continues. Let's go back to our Gemara. The Atta Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael, and of course, when they used to come from Eretz Yisrael, they would quote all the rabbis of Eretz Yisrael. So he quoted Rabbi Yochanan. He says, "Said Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol sheshata achar bala eser shanim b'nisei shuv eino yoleh." Interesting and also very controversial halakha that any woman who her husband dies or divorced, she's not married, and so she's presumably not sexually active for 10 years, she doesn't get remarried or get into a relationship for 10 years, then hormonally, or maybe it's hormonal, it's not clear exactly, of course, why, but they said she will not become pregnant. So she will no longer become pregnant. So that's a rule you can rely on. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said. Amar Rav Nachman, he said Rav Nachman, but one second. That's only true if she's really not committed to being married. That's only where she doesn't intend to get married. Now it's not clear if this means ever or to a particular person. Aval if she was planning on getting married, let's just say there were circumstances. Again, this is what's not clear. She didn't meet the right person, so she wanted to get married, but she just didn't happen. Or there was a specific person she was planning to marry, but circumstances prevented them from getting married for that period of time. So one of those two pshatim, right? If she was data linasei, then essentially her, again, it's not clear why this would be, but then she certainly can become pregnant over time. Okay, so that was the psak that Rav Yochanan said and Rav Nachman added to. Amar le Rava, the bat of Chisda. Now, Rava, if you recall, we had the story in Rava Batra that Rava married the daughter of Rav Chisda. But before Rava married her, another person married her. I'm trying to remember who. I don't know. But she was married to, I want to say Rav Nachman, but I don't think it's Rav Nachman. Anyway, she married. Does it say there who she was married to first?
The daughter of Rav Chisda.
Anyways,
Rami Bar Chama?
Oh, Rami Bar Chama, okay.
Yeah.
So there's a story in Bava Batra that Rami Bar Chama and Rava were both students of Rav Chisda, and they were sitting there one day, and Rav Chisda's daughter walked into the room, right? And Rav Chisda said to his daughter, "Who do you want to marry? Right? Which one of these guys do you want to marry?" I'm not going to hold any of them. And she said, "Both." Right? And Rava said, "I want to be second." Right?
Oh, I remember that.
Right? So she said, I'm going to marry both. Again, we don't know if she was 3 years old or 10. I don't really know the story, but
because he knew he was going to die.
Said, well, if you're going to marry two, I'd rather be the second one. Right? That makes sense. So that's what happened. She married Rami Bar Chama when Bar Chama died, I think, and then over 10 years later, she married Rava, right? And then she had a child. So Rava said to her, "Wait a second. You're having a child. People are saying things about you that maybe you were not so careful in between. Maybe you slept with someone else. Maybe they were doing something wrong. Because how could it be that you were not married for 10 years and then you had a child?" He said that's not possible according to Yochanan, right? So Amar le Rava le bat Rav Chisda, which is his wife. It sounds like they had a great relationship. He said to his wife, "Kamaranani Rabbanan abatrich." The Rabbanan, all my friends in yeshiva are talking about you, right? They're saying not nice things, that you probably cheated, you slept around. Amrulay, she said to him, "Look, Anad daitei Allah chavi. I was planning on marrying you the whole time, right? Whatever reason, I couldn't marry you. Maybe Rav Chisda was married. Maybe Rava was married. Maybe he didn't have the money. Maybe he lived somewhere else. But I knew I was going to marry you. So it's the same. It's the exception that Rav Nachman gave, which is that as long as you're intending to get married, and here it now makes it sound like a specific person, that does not fall into this rule." In fact, there was a woman who came in front of Rav Yosef. Amrlo Rebbe, she said to him, "Ana, I shehiti achar bali 10 shanim yoladati." I don't understand this rule that you made up, Rav Yochanan. My husband died. I waited 15 years. I got remarried. Now I had another kid. So I give a lie to this thing. Amrlo said to Biti, my daughter, "Al totzi laz al devrei chachamim." Are you saying the rabbis are liars? Amrlo said, "Oh, you're right. I did cheat along the way. The nachri nevalta. I slept with a Jew." So you can understand. Anyways, it's the story, but maybe she was assuming a non-Jew didn't count in this case. But says Rabbi Yochanan, I know something was up. Amar Shmuel. Now Shmuel said, we're going to do a few more lines just to finish it out. But Shmuel is really talking about our Mishnah. The Mishnah says all these women, well, not all these women, these two women, let's say. Shmuel, in fact, is really referring to a Gemara later, where he gives a list of women who are supposed to wait for a certain amount of time, as we were talking about yesterday. Someone who gets divorced, someone who's in a relationship, they should wait some time. Says Shmuel, כולן צריכות להמתין 3 חודשים. Every one of these people, it's a list later, has to wait 3 months, חוץ מגיורת ומשוחררת קטנה, right? Except for a woman who converts and a woman who is a slave, she's non-Jewish, shifcha Kananit, and then becomes Jewish, so she's freed, right, which is essentially conversion. And she's less than 12, right? She's a katana, she can't have a child. So in those cases, those people can get married right away because since they couldn't conceive anyways, we let them get married. Now that implies, of course.
What's the case?
Sorry?
What's the case?
We're gonna have later, there's a list of cases of people who about how long they have to wait, how long they can get married after they become suitable for another husband. Okay? So
The husband died, or
that's one case. They died, they're divorced, they're converted,
right.
they okay. Things like that. Miyun, people, and this kind of stuff. So what Shmuel said, all of them should, everyone who's in a relationship and then gets into a new relationship should wait 3 months because you want to see if she's pregnant or not pregnant, right? Except for the case of a convert or a Eved Meshuchar who's a child. Because in that case, of course, they're newly able to get married, but also they couldn't have become pregnant. But the implication of Shmuel is that if they were a Jewish person who was a child, they would not be allowed to get married right away. They'd have to wait 3 months, which contradicts our Mishnah. Right?
What's the deal with the Megillah?
So, Mr. Khan, remember, the case there is an Eved Kanani, a woman who's non-Jewish, who's a shikha, right, a servant. And then if the husband frees her, then she becomes Jewish, right? They become free.
No, I understand, but she could have had...
No, she's a minor. She's less than 12.
Oh, she has to be a minor and it's...
Correct. Yora and Mishuchrar, both Kitana, sorry. They're both Kitana. Aval, 4 lines, 5 lines from the bottom. Kitana bat Yisrael, tzricha lamtin 3 chadashim. Says Shmuel, a Kitana bat Yisrael who slept with a person, her husband died, or she got divorced when she was 9 years old, or 10 years old. She can't marry someone else unless she waits 3 months, even though she can't become pregnant.
Become pregnant, but
we're gonna say it's a 0, but yes, that's Shmuel's halacha. Ask the Gemara B'mai. Now, how did she leave her first husband? Right? What led to the breakup of that marriage? Even Miyun, if they did Miyun, remember, a girl who's less than 12 was married off by her, brothers or mother, was allowed to do Miyun. So Hamar Shmuel de Lobai. Shmuel says, and we're gonna quote all these Shmuels later. But Shmuel says you don't need to wait if you have Miyun, right? So that again, a 10-year-old girl who's married off by her mother and decides she doesn't like the husband can walk out of there and sleep with someone else, get married to someone else without any waiting period. Beget, if it was a case where she was married off by her father, which means that was a kedushin d'oraita, and her husband divorced her, Amr Shmuel Chadas in there. Shmuel already said that you need to wait 3 months. Amr Shmuel, 2 lines in the bottom, Mi anubo, if a girl does miyan in her husband, she doesn't have to wait 3 months. Not on la get, but if her husband divorces her properly, then she does have to wait 3 months. Ella, it must be biznut. It must be, we're talking about a case where this minor, right, was divorced from her husband because she slept with somebody else. Right? So she had an illicit relationship, right? Not she didn't leave her husband. She wasn't married, right? So she had an illicit relationship with someone. And then we say, even though after that act, she then wants to get married, she can't get married for 3 months because we don't know if through that intercourse she became pregnant. So we need to know.
I thought a minor can't become pregnant.
It says the word on top line of Daf Lamed Hey, the Gazura Banan Kitana Mishum Gedola. And they made a takana in a minor who obviously cannot become pregnant because in the equivalent case, in a 15-year-old or a 45-year-old, she would have the potential to become pregnant. And therefore, they made a gzera on a katana, a tu gedola, shin gedola. We're going to stop here, but the next question, of course, is going to be, what about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah said that if they're a katana, they can go out right away. Why don't you have the same gzera? And that's going to be tomorrow's daf.
Thank you. It's fascinating.
Challenging.
I mean, it's like, it's interesting to think that they're treating her like she could be like that she's still a minor if she obviously has the ability to actually go through with like sleeping with like a man and then she decides to sleep with another man. That's kind of like actually being more mature. So
It's true. No, it's definitely true that it gets very complicated in terms of which agency we get from and what we don't get, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's very interesting. Okay, next Shabbat is Pesach. I'm going to be your Hanan. Are you around for Pesach?
Yes.
So God willing, Miriam, I think you're around. I know you're around. So an hour before Mincha, hopefully.
Okay.
And that is?
An hour before Pesach, Shabbos, Shabbat, first day of Pesach, right?
First day of Pesach, and then hopefully the same time second. So whatever time that is, we'll figure it out.
Right. Makes sense. Okay.
Have a good week, everyone.
Yep.
Okay. Shavua tov.
So-